Welcome to the Historian's Tome, where we guide you on another quiet journey through the pages of history. Tonight, we turn our attention to a story that has fascinated dreamers, scholars, and seekers for more than 2,000 years. A tale that drifts somewhere between history and legend, between philosophy and myth. It is the story of Atlantis, the lost civilization said to have vanished beneath the sea. Our first and most detailed account comes from the philosopher Plato, writing in the 4th century before the Common Era. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, he described a mighty island kingdom that lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the narrow strait we now call Gibraltar. Atlantis was said to be a land rich in resources, powerful in fleets, and dazzling in its temples and palaces. It was a place where human ambition reached toward greatness, yet where pride and excess brought downfall. For Plato, Atlantis was more than a story, it was also a lesson. He set it against his vision of ancient Athens, a city of balance and virtue, to warn against arrogance, greed, and unchecked power. Was he recounting a memory of some distant past preserved by Egyptian priests? Or was he creating an allegory to teach his students? That question has lingered ever since his words were first written. From the classical world to the present day, many have searched for the truth behind the legend. Some look to the volcanic islands of the Aegean Sea, where the eruption of Thera may have swallowed part of its civilization. Others see traces in North Africa, in the deep Atlantic, or even across the ocean in the Americas. Still others believe Atlantis was never a real place at all, but a symbol of humanity's hopes and fears. What remains constant is the enduring mystery. Atlantis has inspired explorers, mystics, and writers of every age. It has grown into one of the most powerful legends in our collective imagination. Tonight we will follow that legend, slowly and gently, from its first words in Plato's works to its many echoes across history, science, and storytelling. So let the story of Atlantis unfold like a calm tide, carrying you through ancient temples, lost cities, and timeless myths, until sleep arrives as quietly as the sea upon forgotten shores. Our journey begins with the very first telling of the Atlantis story. For all the myths and legends that later grew around it, the origins are surprisingly precise. We know the tale because of one man, the philosopher Plato, writing in Athens during the 4th century before the Common Era. His works Timaeus and Critias are the only surviving sources that describe Atlantis directly, and they remain the foundation for everything that has come since. Plato did not present Atlantis in a book of myths or in a collection of folk tales. Instead, he wove the story into philosophical dialogues. These dialogues were written as conversations, where figures debate questions about the universe, the soul, and the ideal state. Within this larger discussion, Plato introduces Atlantis as an example, a story passed down from ancient times, preserved by Egyptian priests, and retold by his own ancestor Solon. According to Plato, Solon had traveled to Egypt 2 centuries earlier, where he heard from the priests of Sais about a powerful island empire that had existed long ago. The Egyptians, said Plato, described Atlantis as a mighty land located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the narrow strait we call Gibraltar. It was larger than Libya and Asia combined, a vast island in the Atlantic Ocean. From there, the Atlanteans commanded fleets of ships, conquered neighboring lands, and sought dominion over much of the known world. Plato dated this story to 9,000 years before his own lifetime. That would place Atlantis in a time so distant it seemed to belong almost to another age of the world, a forgotten epoch when empires rose and fell before the birth of classical civilization. Whether he intended this to be taken literally or as a way of lending weight to the tale is still debated. In his account, Atlantis was not only powerful but also highly advanced. Its kings traced their lineage to Poseidon, the god of the sea, who had once fallen in love with a mortal woman on the island and founded the royal line. With divine ancestry, fertile lands, and abundant resources, Atlantis became rich and ambitious. Its people built palaces and harbors, temples and canals, all described with striking detail. Yet even in Plato's telling, the greatness of Atlantis carried within it the seeds of its decline. The story then turns to conflict. Plato describes a great war between the Atlanteans and the ancient Athenians. The Atlanteans, he wrote, had extended their power across many lands, enslaving or subjugating much of the Mediterranean world. They sought to impose their dominion upon Greece itself. Yet in this tale, it was Athens, though young and not yet the mighty city of Plato's day, that resisted them. The Athenians stood firm, defending their freedom and virtue, and in doing so, they overcame the vast empire of Atlantis. This is where the moral element of the story becomes clear. Plato was not only recounting a curious legend, he was teaching through allegory. Atlantis, vast and wealthy yet corrupt and proud, became a warning. Athens, small but virtuous, became an example of courage and moderation. The triumph of Athens was meant to show the superiority of justice and order over arrogance and greed. Yet there is also the other side of the story, the one that has captured imaginations ever since. Plato wrote that after the war, Atlantis was struck by disaster. In a single day and night of misfortune, earthquakes and floods swallowed the island. The once great empire vanished beneath the sea, leaving only stories behind. This vision of sudden destruction, of a mighty world erased without trace, is part of what has given the Atlantis tale such enduring power. Even in ancient times, readers wondered whether Plato had preserved a memory of real events. Could Atlantis have been a record of some forgotten civilization destroyed by natural catastrophe? Or was it entirely a creation of the philosopher's imagination, designed only to illustrate a moral lesson? The debate began in Plato's own lifetime and has never ended. What is certain is that with Timaeus and Critias, the story of Atlantis entered history. These texts became the source that every later writer, from antiquity to the modern world, has returned to. All later traditions, whether skeptical or believing, mystical or scientific, begin here with Plato's words. As we close this first chapter, let us reflect on the power of a single story told long ago in the quiet setting of a philosophical conversation. From that beginning, Atlantis has grown into one of the most enduring mysteries of the human imagination. Plato's description of Atlantis did not stop at the broad strokes of power and conquest. He also painted a vivid picture of the island itself, a world so carefully detailed that later readers could almost imagine walking through its streets. In his dialogues, he gives us not only a lost empire, but a vision of its geography, its architecture, and its wonders. Atlantis, he wrote, was arranged in a pattern unlike any ordinary land. At the heart of the island stood a hill, sacred to Poseidon, the god of the sea. From this central point, the land and waters extended outward in a series of concentric circles, alternating rings of earth and sea. Bridges and causeways connected these circles, creating harbors and canals that allowed ships to sail into the very heart of the city. The image is one of deliberate harmony, a place designed both by nature and by divine influence. Within the innermost ring stood the royal palace and the great temple of Poseidon. The palace was adorned with gleaming metals, its walls lined with copper, tin, and a rare shining alloy that Plato called orichalcum. The temple itself was vast, a place of worship and awe, housing a statue of Poseidon driving six-winged horses, a reminder of the divine power said to have shaped the island. Sacred bulls were kept within the temple grounds, and rituals to the sea god formed a part of the rhythm of Atlantean life. From this sacred center stretched an impressive city. The Atlanteans constructed walls of stone around the rings, each wall plated with different metals so that they shone with dazzling colors in the sunlight. Bridges arched over the waterways, linking the circles together. Towers and gates were set along the outer rings, guarding both land and sea approaches. In this arrangement, Atlantis was not simply a city, but a fortress of beauty and strength, a blend of engineering skill and religious devotion. The island itself was rich in resources. Plato described fertile fields that produced two harvests each year, one nourished by winter rains, the other by irrigation during the dry season. Vast plains stretched across the land, divided into sections and carefully managed. There were forests of fine timber, mountains with abundant springs, and meadows for grazing animals. Elephants roamed in great numbers, alongside other creatures both familiar and strange. The abundance of life seemed to mark Atlantis as a favored land, blessed by both nature and the gods. Beneath the soil lay precious metals. Gold and silver were plentiful, as were copper and tin. Orichalcum, second only to gold in value, was said to shine with a fiery brilliance. These resources allowed the Atlanteans to construct not only functional works, but also monuments of splendor. The canals that linked the rings were lined with stone, the docks were filled with ships, and the marketplaces displayed the wealth of the empire. At the center of this abundance stood the royal dynasty, said to have descended from Poseidon himself. According to Plato, the god had once fallen in love with a mortal woman named Cleito, who lived on the island before the city was built. Poseidon, to protect her, enclosed the hill where she lived with circles of sea and land, forming the unique pattern of Atlantis. Together they had 10 sons, and Poseidon divided the island among them. The eldest, Atlas, became king, and from him the island took its name. His brothers ruled other parts of the island, yet all were bound together under the authority of Atlas and the central throne. This divine lineage gave the Atlantean kings both power and legitimacy. They were seen not only as rulers, but as guardians of the god's legacy. Each generation was expected to rule with wisdom, to preserve the balance of the island, and to honor the temples and rituals of Poseidon. In the early years, according to the story, they did so faithfully. The city prospered, and its people lived in harmony with their environment and with each other. In these details, Plato offers a vision that is both alluring and haunting. Atlantis was a city of wealth and wonder, where nature and divine influence seemed to work together. Yet the very grandeur of its design hints at the themes to come. A city so rich in resources, so filled with power, could easily slip into pride and excess. For now, though, we picture Atlantis at its height, gleaming with metals, humming with activity, and shining like a jewel set upon the sea. Atlantis, in Plato's telling, was not only remarkable for its geography and wealth, it was equally impressive for the way its society was organized, for the balance of its governance, and for the culture that grew from its prosperity. The Atlanteans lived in a world shaped by divine heritage, abundant resources, and a spirit of ambition that reached far across the seas. Yet within these strengths also lay the beginnings of weakness, for their greatness came with temptations that would eventually test the soul of their civilization. At the top of society stood the kings, descended from Poseidon and Cleito. The eldest son of that divine union, Atlas, gave his name to the island, and his line held the highest throne. His brothers ruled other parts of the land, 10 in all, each with authority over a region, yet always bound to the central throne. They met together regularly in council, swearing oaths over sacred bulls, judging disputes, and agreeing upon laws that bound them all. The image is one of unity among rulers, a balance between shared responsibility and supreme leadership. The governance of Atlantis was carefully arranged. The kings ruled with both authority and restraint, for the laws of Poseidon were sacred, engraved upon a pillar of orichalcum in the temple. Each ruler was expected to govern his people with fairness, to honor the cause, and to maintain the harmony of the island. In the early years, Plato tells us, this system worked well. The rulers were just, the people were obedient, and the land prospered under a sense of order and purpose. Atlantis also excelled in power upon the sea. Its navy was vast, far greater than anything the ancient world had known. Thousands of ships filled the harbors, protected by the concentric canals and fortified docks. These ships sailed not only for war, but also for trade, carrying the wealth of Atlantis to distant lands. The Atlanteans were skilled sailors and engineers, building vessels that could endure long journeys in rough waters. The power of their navy allowed them to extend influence across the Mediterranean and beyond, subjugating peoples and spreading their dominion. The engineering of Atlantis was equally impressive. The city was filled with marvels of construction, from bridges and canals to grand temples and palaces. The rings of land and water were connected by tunnels wide enough for ships lined with stone and decorated with metals that shone in the sun. Aqueducts carried water from the mountains, supplying the fields and gardens. Roads stretched across the island, linking plains to harbors and mountains to valleys. It was a civilization that celebrated both beauty and practicality, one that sought to harness the gifts of the land and the sea. Religion lay at the heart of this society. The people of Atlantis revered Poseidon above all, honoring him with rituals and sacrifices. In the central temple, beneath the statue of the god driving his chariot, sacred ceremonies were held. The kings themselves took part in these rites, offering bulls to the god, swearing oaths of justice and seeking his blessing for their rule. The connection to Poseidon was not only symbolic but also political, binding the rulers to their divine ancestry and reinforcing their authority over the people. The culture of Atlantis reflected both their prosperity and their ambition. They valued strength and discipline, yet they also delighted in display and grandeur. Their palaces and temples gleamed with metals, their markets overflowed with goods, and their festivals celebrated both the gods and the greatness of their people. In the early generations, this culture was guided by moderation, as the divine blood of Poseidon still influenced the hearts of the kings. They ruled with balance, honoring both duty and restraint. Yet Plato hints that this balance did not last forever. As the divine portion within their blood grew weaker over time, the Atlanteans became more fully human, and with that came pride, greed, and a hunger for conquest. The values that had once guided them began to fade, replaced by the temptations of wealth and power. Their culture remained advanced, but it was no longer as virtuous as it had been in its beginnings. So we see in Atlantis a civilization like no other, rich in resources, skilled in governance, mighty in fleets, and impressive in its engineering. Its devotion to Poseidon shaped its temples, its rulers, and its laws. Its culture reflected both beauty and ambition. Yet within its greatness lay the flaw of human weakness, a reminder that no society, however powerful, is free from the dangers of excess. When Plato set down the story of Atlantis, he was not simply writing a tale of adventure or mystery. He was first and foremost a philosopher, concerned with questions of virtue, justice, and the proper order of society. To understand Atlantis, we must place it within the purpose of his dialogues. For Plato, the Lost Island was not only a wonder of the imagination, but also a mirror held up to humanity, a way of teaching through story. In the dialogue, Timaeus, the account of Atlantis, appears as part of a larger discussion about the nature of the universe and the structure of the ideal state. Plato used the story to contrast two kinds of civilizations. On the one side stood Athens, ancient, virtuous, and disciplined. On the other stood Atlantis, rich, ambitious, and corrupt. The war between them was not simply about territory, it was a moral contest, showing the triumph of balance and justice over arrogance and excess. This theme reflects one of Plato's central concerns. He believed that hubris, the overreaching pride that leads individuals and states alike into downfall, was among the greatest dangers to human society. Atlantis became a symbol of that danger. The Atlanteans, blessed with resources and guided at first by divine influence, lost their way as greed and ambition grew stronger. Their punishment was swift, a destruction as sudden as their rise had been glorious. In this lesson, Plato warned his readers that even the mightiest empires can fall when they stray from virtue. At the same time, Athens, though smaller and weaker in material terms, embodied the values that Plato wished to praise. He described it as a city of courage, self-restraint, and devotion to the common good. The victory of Athens over Atlantis was meant to show that true strength lies not in riches or armies, but in justice and order. This was a recurring theme in Plato's work, where he often contrasted the appearance of power with the reality of moral strength. In this way, the story of Atlantis can be compared to other allegories that Plato used throughout his writings. The allegory of the cave, for example, illustrated the difference between shadows and reality, urging his readers to seek truth beyond appearances. The myth of air, placed at the end of the Republic, showed the consequences of justice and injustice in the afterlife. Atlantis fits within this same tradition. It was not necessarily meant as history, but as a teaching tool, a myth with a purpose. Yet from the very beginning, the story sparked curiosity. Some of Plato's contemporaries and later readers in classical antiquity wondered if there might be more to it than allegory. Could the Egyptian priests have preserved a genuine memory of an ancient civilization destroyed by flood and earthquake? Was Plato reporting an actual tradition, however distorted, that had reached him through Solon? Others dismissed the story as pure invention, crafted to make a philosophical point and nothing more. The earliest interpretations were divided along these lines. Historians and philosophers sometimes treated the tale with skepticism, seeing it as a clever device rather than a record of the past. Poets and storytellers, however, found in Atlantis a rich source of imagery. The vision of a shining city swallowed by the sea appealed to the imagination in a way that mere allegory could not. Even in antiquity, then, the dual nature of the story was clear. It was both moral lesson and mystery, both parable and possible memory. Plato himself never clarified how he wanted his readers to take the account. He presented it with detail and seriousness, as though it had been preserved by tradition. Yet he also framed it within dialogues devoted to philosophy. Perhaps he intended it to work on both levels at once. The lesson would be effective whether or not the story was literally true. What mattered was the warning it carried. As we reflect on this, we can see how the myth of Atlantis was never just about a vanished island. It was about the fragility of human achievement, the dangers of pride, and the enduring need for justice and moderation. For Plato's students, and for us, it remains a reminder that no empire is so great that it cannot fall, and no society so secure that it does not need virtue to survive. Thus, the moral of the myth is clear. Atlantis is not only a tale of a lost city, but also a mirror for our own world. It asks us to look closely at the balance between ambition and humility, between wealth and justice, between power and wisdom. That balance, fragile and precious, is what allows civilizations to endure. The story of Atlantis does not stand alone in the traditions of the ancient world. Across many cultures, we find echoes of similar tales, stories of powerful cities, of floods that wiped out entire peoples, and of lands remembered only in fragments of memory. To place Atlantis in context, we can look at these other traditions, where myth and history meet in stories of destruction and renewal. Plato himself claimed that the story of Atlantis came from Egypt. According to his account, Solon, the great Athenian statesman and lawgiver, had once traveled to the city of Sais in the Nile Delta. There, Egyptian priests told him of an island empire that had existed 9,000 years before, a kingdom destroyed by the sea. The Egyptians were known for their careful records and long cultural memory, so Plato presented this as a tradition preserved through their wisdom. Whether the priests truly spoke of such a place, or whether the story was shaped to fit Plato's purpose, remains uncertain. Yet the Egyptian connection gives Atlantis a sense of depth, as if it might be linked to the broader tapestry of the ancient world. Turning to Mesopotamia, we find another striking parallel. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians all preserve stories of a great flood that once swept across the land. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known works of literature, a man named Utnapishtim tells of how he built a great boat to survive a deluge sent by the gods. His tale closely resembles the later biblical account of Noah's Ark, where humanity is saved from destruction by a single family chosen to preserve life. These flood stories share a common theme: a world cleansed by water, civilizations erased, and a new beginning emerging after disaster. Greek tradition itself offers another echo. The myth of Deucalion tells of a flood sent by Zeus to punish humanity for its corruption. Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha survived in a boat, landing upon Mount Parnassus once the waters receded. From there, they repopulated the earth. Like the Mesopotamian and Hebrew stories, this myth connects human sin, divine punishment, and catastrophic flood, a combination that resonates strongly with Plato's vision of Atlantis sinking beneath the sea. The Minoan civilization of Crete also comes to mind when we consider echoes of Atlantis. The Minoans flourished for centuries, building palaces, developing trade, and leaving behind art of remarkable beauty. Yet around the middle of the second millennium before the Common Era, they faced catastrophe. The eruption of the volcanic island Thera, today known as Santorini, sent ash and waves across the Aegean. Earthquakes and tsunamis struck, devastating the Minoans and weakening their power. In later centuries, only ruins remained, and memories of their fall may have lived on in Greek tradition. Many scholars believe that this event could have been a seed for the Atlantis story, preserved and reshaped into Plato's dramatic account. When we gather all of these traditions together, a pattern emerges. Across cultures and continents, stories of floods, lost lands, and fallen civilizations appear again and again. Some may have grown from actual natural disasters, such as volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, or rising seas. Others may have been symbolic, meant to teach lessons about the fragility of human pride and the power of nature. Oral traditions carried these memories across generations, passing down fragments of real events, embroidered with imagination, until myth and history blended into one. This raises the question of whether Atlantis itself could be part of such a shared memory. Perhaps Plato drew upon older traditions, reshaping them to fit his philosophical goals. Or perhaps the flood myths of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece all reflect a deeper human memory of times when the sea rose, storms raged, and settlements were lost. Human communities are always vulnerable to the forces of nature, and it is no wonder that so many cultures have imagined the sea as both giver of life and bringer of destruction. In the end, Atlantis fits into a much larger chorus of ancient stories. It is not alone, but part of a wider tradition in which humanity remembers its own fragility. Whether as history or parable, these echoes remind us of the deep connection between myth and memory. Floods, lost cities, and vanished peoples remain among the most enduring tales because they speak to something universal. They remind us of how quickly greatness can be swept away and how memory clings to the ruins left behind. At the heart of Plato's tale of Atlantis lies a moment of sudden and overwhelming destruction. He tells us that in a single day and night of misfortune, the mighty island was struck by earthquakes and floods. Its temples, its harbors, its fields, and its people were swallowed by the sea. The empire that had stretched across distant lands vanished without a trace, leaving only silence where once there had been grandeur. This image, dramatic and final, has lingered in memory for centuries, shaping how we imagine the power of nature to erase even the greatest achievements of humankind. The idea of a world destroyed in a single day and night captures both fear and awe. Plato's words echo the deep anxiety that ancient peoples felt toward the sea and the earth beneath them. For the Greeks, as for many other cultures, the ocean was not only a source of wealth and life, but also a force of chaos and danger. Ships could vanish in storms, coasts could be battered by waves, and earthquakes could tear the land apart without warning. The destruction of Atlantis symbolized this constant tension between human ambition and the untamable powers of nature. When modern readers consider Plato's description, they often connect it to real catastrophes from history. Among the most striking is the eruption of the volcanic island of Thera, today known as Santorini, in the Aegean Sea. Around the middle of the second millennium before the Common Era, Thera erupted with a force among the greatest in recorded history. The explosion tore the island apart, hurling ash high into the atmosphere and sending massive tsunamis across the surrounding waters. Settlements on Thera itself were buried, while the waves reached the shores of Crete and devastated the thriving Minoan civilization. The Minoans were at that time one of the most advanced cultures in the Mediterranean. They built palaces at Knossos and elsewhere, traded across the seas, and developed a rich artistic tradition. Yet the eruption of Thera, combined with earthquakes and later invasions, brought their world to an end. The palaces were abandoned, and the memory of their greatness faded. For the Greeks of later centuries, stories of a once powerful civilization lost to the sea may have blended with Plato's imagination, giving rise to the legend of Atlantis. Tsunamis in particular offer a vivid explanation for the sinking of Atlantis. These giant waves, caused by earthquakes or volcanic eruptions, can sweep entire coastlines away in moments. To ancient observers, such events must have seemed like the wrath of the gods. Without modern science to explain them, people turned to myth to make sense of the destruction. A land swallowed by the sea could easily become the basis for stories of a lost kingdom, remembered in fragments and retold across generations. Earthquakes, too, played their part in ancient fears. Greece and the surrounding regions lie on active fault lines, and tremors were a familiar part of life. Plato's description of Atlantis collapsing under both earthquakes and floods reflects these natural realities. The ground could shake without warning, toppling walls and splitting the earth. Combined with floods, such disasters could erase entire communities, leaving survivors to pass down the memory as a story of divine punishment. The power of these natural forces explains why myths of destruction appear in so many cultures. From Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean, from the Hebrew Bible to Greek legend, floods and catastrophes are central themes. They serve not only to explain natural disasters, but also to remind humanity of its limits. No matter how rich or mighty a society may be, it remains vulnerable to the elements that shape the earth and sea. In the story of Atlantis, this theme is sharpened into a warning. The Atlanteans, with all their wealth and power, had turned to arrogance and greed. Their downfall was not only physical, but also moral. The great catastrophe that struck them symbolized both divine punishment and the simple truth of nature's strength. The message was clear. Human pride cannot stand forever against the forces of the world. As we picture the fall of Atlantis, we can imagine the sea rushing over walls of gleaming metal, temples shattering under the force of quakes, and ships tossed aside by waves that rose higher than the tallest towers. Whether inspired by real events like the eruption of Thera or by the fears of sailors and farmers who live close to the sea, this vision remains haunting. It speaks to a universal truth, that the line between security and ruin is thinner than we often believe. Atlantis was remembered not only as a place of wealth and splendor, but also as a warning carried by the image of sudden destruction. In a single day and night, its greatness was lost, and in that loss we see both the fragility of civilization and the enduring power of myth to preserve the memory of catastrophe. Few questions about Atlantis have stirred as much debate as the question of its location. If it ever existed outside of Plato's imagination, where could this mighty island empire have stood? Across centuries, thinkers, explorers, and modern researchers have searched the seas and deserts for traces of it. While no definitive evidence has been found, a number of theories have gained prominence. Each has its allure, its strengths, and its weaknesses. To understand these ideas, we must explore both ancient hints and modern discoveries. One of the most popular suggestions is that Atlantis was connected to the island of Santorini and the surrounding Aegean world. This theory is grounded in the eruption of Thera, one of the most destructive volcanic events in human history. The explosion not only shattered the island of Santorini, but also triggered tsunamis that devastated nearby Crete. The Minoan civilization flourishing at the time suffered terribly from this disaster. Palaces were damaged, trade routes disrupted, and the once vibrant culture entered a steep decline. Supporters of this theory note the parallels between Plato's tale and the fate of the Minoans. A great naval power, destroyed suddenly by natural disaster, fits the broad outlines of the Atlantis myth. However, there is a difficulty. Plato placed Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the ancient name for the Strait of Gibraltar. Santorini, by contrast, lies firmly within the Mediterranean. Unless Plato used the phrase symbolically, the Aegean does not match his description of a land outside the known Greek world. Another enduring theory shifts the focus westward to the Strait of Gibraltar itself. Some researchers have argued that Atlantis lay just beyond, perhaps in southern Spain or off the Iberian coast. They point to features such as marshlands and ruins near Doñana National Park, where ancient settlements once stood. To these scholars, the Iberian Peninsula was once home to a seafaring people whose power reached across the Mediterranean. If Atlantis had its seat here, then Plato's reference to the Pillars of Heracles would make perfect sense. Yet here too, the evidence is fragile. Archaeological remains do exist, but none that clearly point to a vast empire of concentric canals, golden temples, and mighty fleets. What has been found can often be explained by known ancient cultures, rather than a vanished one. Still others turn south toward North Africa. One striking candidate is the Risha structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara, in modern-day Mauritania. This massive circular formation in the desert closely resembles Plato's description of Atlantis, with its concentric rings of land and water. The scale matches surprisingly well, and satellite images highlight its otherworldly beauty. Could this be the site of the fabled kingdom? Proponents argue that long ago, this region may have been wetter and capable of sustaining life. They imagine a thriving culture later destroyed by environmental change or catastrophe. Yet doubts remain. The Risha structure is a natural geological formation, not clearly the work of human hands. No evidence of monumental architecture has been uncovered, nor signs of a vast seafaring empire. Still, its appearance keeps it at the heart of Atlantis speculation. Further west lies another category of theories, those that place Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean or even the Americas. Some writers have suggested that the Caribbean, with its islands and mysterious ruins, could hold the key. Others look to Central and South America, pointing to the advanced civilizations of the Maya, Aztec, or Inca as echoes of a lost Atlantic culture. These ideas gained popularity during the Age of Exploration, when Europeans first encountered the grandeur of the New World and sought to link it to old myths. While the vast scale and sophistication of American civilizations are undeniable, the connection to Plato's Atlantis is less clear. His text describes a place directly across from the Mediterranean, in the Atlantic, but not across an entire ocean. Furthermore, these cultures arose thousands of years after Plato dated Atlantis' destruction, making the timeline difficult to reconcile. Each of these theories carries weight, but also problems. The Aegean theory draws strength from its direct parallels with the Minoan disaster, but falters in geography. The Iberian theory fits Plato's description of location, but lacks definitive remains of a grand empire. The Sahara's Eye offers a striking visual match, but maybe only a natural wonder. The Atlantic and American theories appeal to imagination and the allure of discovery, but conflict with historical timelines. What unites them all is the desire to anchor Plato's myth in the soil and stone of the real world. For some, Atlantis is not simply a parable, but a memory of an actual place, distorted by time. For others, it is proof of humankind's deep longing for lost golden ages and forgotten civilizations. Whether in the Aegean, the Atlantic, or the Sahara, the search reflects our need to bridge the gap between myth and history, between imagination and evidence. In the end, the question of where Atlantis was may remain unanswered. Yet the search itself has inspired countless discoveries, pushing us to study ancient cultures more closely and to consider how myths can guide exploration. Atlantis, whether real or not, continues to shape the way we look at the past and imagine the mysteries still hidden beneath the waves or sands of time. For many centuries after Plato first wrote of Atlantis, his tale lay quietly in manuscripts, copied and recopied by scribes. During the Middle Ages, knowledge of the ancient world was filtered through the lens of Christian theology and scholastic interpretation. To medieval scholars, Atlantis was rarely seen as a real place to be found upon the earth. Instead, it was often treated as a curious story, a fragment of pagan thought that might contain a moral lesson. Some writers dismissed it as an invention, while others wondered if it could be reconciled with the biblical account of a world shaped by the flood of Noah. The Middle Ages were not a time of great geographic exploration. Much of Europe's learned world was more concerned with interpreting scripture and classical texts than with searching for new lands. In this setting, Atlantis became a story about the pride and punishment of a forgotten people. To many medieval readers, the destruction of Atlantis was another example of divine justice. Just as the Tower of Babel had been toppled by human arrogance, and just as Sodom and Gomorrah had been destroyed for their corruption, so too Atlantis fell when it turned away from virtue. The island was less a puzzle to solve than a warning to heed. Yet the tale of Atlantis never completely faded. With the coming of the Renaissance, interest in the ancient world revived with new energy. Old manuscripts were rediscovered, translated, and debated. Plato's works, once studied mainly in cloisters, found eager readers among humanists, philosophers, and explorers. The Renaissance spirit of inquiry, combined with advances in navigation and cartography, breathed fresh life into the idea of Atlantis. As European explorers set sail into uncharted waters, the possibility of unknown lands across the ocean suddenly became real. The discovery of the Americas in the late 15th century transformed the imagination of Europe. Vast continents and great civilizations had been hidden from European knowledge, and this suggested that Plato's story might also conceal a memory of real lands now waiting to be uncovered. Many thinkers began to ask, could the newly encountered lands across the Atlantic be the fabled Atlantis? Maps from the Renaissance reflect this growing fascination. Some cartographers depicted mysterious islands or hinted at lands beyond the known seas, blending rumor, report, and speculation. In these images, Atlantis was not simply a myth, but a possibility, a place that might yet be charted on a globe. The blending of old legends with new discoveries gave rise to a powerful sense of wonder. For the first time in centuries, Atlantis was seen not only as a symbol of moral decline, but as a geographical mystery that might be solved by exploration. Writers and thinkers of the time added their voices to this speculation. The discovery of advanced civilizations in the Americas gave rise to comparisons with Plato's description of a mighty empire. Some wondered if the Aztecs or the Incas were descendants of Atlanteans who had survived the catastrophe. Others proposed that entire continents might once have been joined by land bridges, remnants of which had sunk beneath the waves. The language of myth and the language of science began to mingle in the minds of explorers and scholars alike. The Renaissance was also an age of allegory, and not all treated Atlantis as a literal place. Some writers saw in the story an ideal vision of society, one that reflected both human greatness and human flaws. To them, Atlantis represented the potential of humankind when guided by order, balance, and knowledge, as well as the dangers of pride and overreach. This dual reading of the tale, as both a possible reality and a cautionary parable, gave it remarkable flexibility. Atlantis could be whatever a thinker or explorer needed it to be, a lost land to be rediscovered, or a mirror in which to study the rise and fall of nations. By the 16th century, the myth of Atlantis had become firmly entangled with the age of exploration. Each new voyage raised the possibility of fresh discoveries, and each strange land or unfamiliar culture offered fuel for speculation. The blending of Plato's ancient account with the realities of the New World created a powerful narrative of mystery and hope. Perhaps somewhere across the wide ocean lay the ruins of a civilization older than any known, waiting to be revealed by the courage of sailors and the vision of scholars. Thus, during the medieval and Renaissance periods, the image of Atlantis shifted. In the Middle Ages, it had been a moral lesson, framed by the concerns of theology and faith. In the Renaissance, it became both a riddle and an inspiration, revived by the rediscovery of Plato's works in the excitement of new horizons. By merging with the spirit of exploration, the legend of Atlantis stepped out of the realm of allegory and entered once more into the imagination of those who sought to uncover the hidden truths of the world. As the Renaissance gave way to the Enlightenment, the world of ideas shifted once more. Curiosity about ancient tales remained, but the spirit of inquiry was now guided by reason, skepticism, and the tools of emerging science. Scholars began to examine Plato's account of Atlantis with sharper eyes. To some, it remained a rich allegory, a story meant to illustrate human pride and downfall. To others, it was a puzzle of geography and history that could yet be solved. The Enlightenment brought new confidence in the human mind's ability to explain the world. Thinkers began to categorize myths, compare traditions, and sift through the legends of antiquity with careful study. Within this framework, Atlantis often appeared less as a real place and more as a moral tale. Many historians dismissed it outright, arguing that Plato had invented the island to serve as an example of corruption and divine punishment. Yet not all were ready to let the story rest. A few scholars and dreamers wondered whether fragments of truth that lay hidden within the account, waiting to be uncovered by archaeology or natural science. By the 19th century, the fascination with Atlantis had grown stronger than ever. This was an age of rapid discovery. Ancient ruins were being unearthed across the Mediterranean and the Near East, and the past seemed to be revealing its secrets with each new excavation. In this atmosphere, the idea of Atlantis captured the imagination of writers and readers alike. One figure who stood at the center of this renewed interest was Ignatius Donnelly, an American politician and author. In 1882, he published Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, a book that became one of the most influential works ever written on the subject. Donnelly argued with conviction that Atlantis had been real and that it was the source of many of the world's great civilizations. He proposed that the Atlanteans had spread their knowledge across the globe before their homeland was swallowed by the sea. To his readers, this theory offered an explanation for similarities in the myths, architecture, and traditions of distant cultures. Donnelly's book was a sensation. Though scholars dismissed much of his evidence, the public was enthralled. The idea of a mighty lost continent inspired not only curiosity, but also a sense of wonder. Here was a vision of human history that stretched beyond the known, connecting the ruins of the old world with the mysteries of the new. Donnelly's influence was so great that for many years his vision of Atlantis defined how the public imagined it. Even today, echoes of his ideas can be found in popular accounts of the legend. Alongside Donnelly's work, other theories arose that linked Atlantis to the idea of vanished continents. As geology developed, scientists speculated about the possibility of great land masses that had once connected far-flung regions of the Earth. Some hypothesized the existence of Lemuria in the Indian Ocean, or Mu in the Pacific. These supposed continents were invoked to explain similarities in species, fossils, and human traditions. though modern science has since rejected these theories. At the time, they offered fertile ground for blending natural history with the legend of Atlantis. To many, Atlantis was simply another of these lost lands, a vanished cradle of civilization that had left its mark on human memory. The 19th and early 20th centuries also witnessed a growing interest in mystical and spiritual traditions. Theosophy, a movement that sought to blend ancient wisdom with esoteric knowledge, embraced Atlantis as part of its teachings. Writers within this movement described Atlantis as a stage in the spiritual evolution of humanity, a civilization that had once thrived with great powers before falling into corruption and destruction. In these accounts, Atlantis was less a place to be found on a map than a key to understanding the deeper journey of the human soul. The blending of scientific curiosity with mystical speculation created a rich but confusing picture. To some, Atlantis was a geological hypothesis, an echo of real catastrophes that had shaped the Earth. To others, it was a symbol of hidden knowledge, a lost age of wisdom waiting to be remembered. The tension between skepticism and belief gave the legend a unique vitality. By the dawn of the modern age, Atlantis had become more than a story in Plato's dialogues. It had grown into a cultural phenomenon, inspiring books, lectures, and debates across the world. The Enlightenment had cast doubt on the tale, yet the romantic imagination and the discoveries of archaeology kept hope alive. The 19th century had transformed Atlantis into a symbol of both scientific curiosity and spiritual yearning. It was no longer just a myth, but a mirror, reflecting humanity's desire to uncover its forgotten origins and to imagine a past filled with wonders that might yet hold meaning for the present. As the 20th century unfolded, the story of Atlantis did not fade into obscurity. Instead, it grew in unexpected and often unusual directions. Scholars and scientists continued to regard Plato's tale with measured skepticism, yet outside the world of academia, Atlantis became a canvas for imagination, speculation, and even deception. It was a legend that could be reshaped to fit almost any purpose, from mystical teachings to political ideologies. One of the most troubling episodes in this history came during the rise of Nazi occultism. Within that movement, Atlantis was recast as the supposed homeland of an ancient Aryan race. Propagandists and pseudo-historians claimed that the Atlanteans had been a pure and powerful people whose bloodline had survived in northern Europe. Such theories were not based on evidence, but on racial myth-making. By appropriating Atlantis, the regime attempted to lend an air of antiquity and destiny to its ideology. These distortions remind us of the dangers that arise when myths are manipulated for political ends. At the same time, Atlantis also found new life in the spiritual and mystical movements of the 20th century. A central figure in this revival was Edgar Cayce, the American mystic sometimes called the Sleeping Prophet. Through trance readings, Cayce claimed that Atlantis had been a real place with advanced technology. He spoke of flying machines, crystal power, and vast temples where energy was harnessed in ways far beyond modern science. According to his visions, survivors of Atlantis had spread across the globe, influencing Egypt, the Americas, and other ancient civilizations. Cayce even predicted that remnants of Atlantis would one day rise again from the ocean floor. These claims captured the imagination of many. To his followers, Atlantis became not only a historical mystery, but also a spiritual touchstone. The story was no longer just about a city swallowed by the sea. It was about humanity's lost greatness, a reminder that we once possessed wisdom and powers that might someday return. Popular culture eagerly embraced such visions. Throughout the 20th century, Atlantis appeared in novels, films, comic books, and eventually television series. Writers and creators portrayed it as a utopia of gleaming towers, as a kingdom of sorcerers, or as the source of forgotten technologies. For some, it was a paradise lost. For others, it was a cautionary tale of arrogance and collapse. Each new version reshaped Plato's brief description into something that reflected contemporary hopes and fears. By the mid-century, Atlantis had also become a favorite subject for conspiracy theories. Some suggested that governments were hiding evidence of Atlantean technology, while others linked it to extraterrestrial visitations. In these narratives, Atlantis was not simply an island, but a key to unlocking hidden truths about humanity's origins. The lack of evidence did little to slow the speculation. If anything, the mystery grew more alluring the more it resisted explanation. Atlantis also found a home within New Age spirituality. For many believers, it was a symbol of humanity's lost harmony with nature and spirit. Atlanteans were imagined as enlightened beings who lived in balance until their pride and misuse of power brought about their destruction. In this telling, Atlantis served as both inspiration and warning. If modern humanity could rediscover the wisdom of that age, perhaps the mistakes of the past might be avoided. In meditation, in channeling sessions, and in alternative healing practices, Atlantis became a name invoked to recall ancient wisdom. Yet alongside this fascination, thoughtful critics pointed out the differences between genuine inquiry and pseudoscience. Archaeology, geology, and history are built upon evidence, testing, and the patient gathering of data. Pseudoscience, by contrast, often begins with a conclusion and seeks to bend facts to fit the story. Atlantis has too often been placed in the latter category, claimed by those eager for dramatic narratives rather than careful research. The result is that the name of Atlantis is sometimes dismissed by serious scholars, even when it might be useful as a cultural study or as a reflection of ancient memories of catastrophe. The persistence of Atlantis in pseudoscience and popular culture reveals much about human nature. It shows our longing for hidden knowledge, our attraction to mysteries that resist resolution, and our readiness to imagine golden ages behind us. For some, Atlantis is a symbol of what we have lost. For others, it is a dream of what we might one day regain. And yet, when stripped of the distortions, the legend still speaks of something timeless. It is a reminder of fragility, of the thin line between greatness and ruin, and of the enduring power of stories to shape how we see ourselves. In the 20th century, Atlantis became more than a myth. It became a mirror for human imagination, reflecting both our highest aspirations and our most reckless delusions. The challenge lies in discerning which is which, and in remembering that the line between truth and invention can be as shifting and uncertain as the sea itself. As the legend of Atlantis traveled from Plato's dialogues into centuries of speculation, one question remained at the heart of every debate: did such a place truly exist? Modern archaeology and geology have devoted careful attention to this question. And while the verdict is cautious, the search itself has yielded fascinating discoveries. Atlantis has not been found, yet the quest for it has revealed much about how myths can grow from kernels of truth. Archaeology as a discipline rests on evidence that can be tested, measured, and compared. Excavations, dating methods, and geological surveys build a picture of the past grounded in material remains. Within that framework, scholars have asked whether Plato's tale could have described a real event or a memory preserved through generations. While Atlantis, as described, has never been discovered, the earth and the sea hold many examples of lost worlds that echo aspects of the myth. One of the most dramatic is the ancient Egyptian port city of Heracleion, also called Thonis, which once thrived at the mouth of the Nile. For centuries, it lay hidden beneath the waters, its temples and statues preserved in the silt. Divers in the early 21st century uncovered colossal sculptures, inscriptions, and evidence of a bustling harbor that had vanished after earthquakes and floods altered the delta. Though Heracleion is not Atlantis, it shows that entire cities can indeed slip beneath the sea and be forgotten until rediscovered by chance. Another evocative site lies off the coast of Japan near Yonaguni. In the 1980s, divers encountered massive stone structures beneath the water, shaped like terraces, stairways, and platforms. Some argued these were the remains of an ancient civilization swallowed by rising seas, while others insisted the formations were natural, sculpted by currents and geological processes. Whether artificial or not, the Yonaguni site demonstrates how quickly the human mind links unusual ruins with legendary cities. It is a reminder of our tendency to weave stories from stone, water, and mystery. Geology also contributes to the conversation. Around the world, evidence shows that ancient peoples lived through catastrophes that reshaped their landscapes. The eruption of Thera, now called Santorini, in the Aegean Sea during the 2nd millennium BCE is one of the most powerful volcanic events in human memory. It devastated the Minoan civilization, sent tsunamis across the Mediterranean, and darkened skies with ash. Such a catastrophe could easily inspire tales of a powerful island destroyed in a single day and night. Other examples can be found beyond the Mediterranean. Earthquakes have swallowed coastal settlements, storms have shifted shorelines, and sea levels have risen steadily since the end of the last ice age. Across the world, archaeologists have uncovered sunken ruins off India's coast at Dwarka, submerged temples near Southeast Asia, and flooded caves holding traces of prehistoric life. Each discovery reminds us that the ocean has always been both a giver of life and a destroyer of civilizations. When these findings are compared with Plato's account, scholars usually reach a careful conclusion. Atlantis, as described with concentric canals, vast palaces, and an empire rivaling Athens, does not correspond to any known civilization. There is no evidence of a global maritime power 9,000 years before Plato. The archaeological record shows flourishing cultures in that era, but none resembling the Atlantean empire he described. Still, this does not diminish the power of the story. Many researchers suggest that Plato may have drawn upon memories of real catastrophes, perhaps transmitted from Egypt or other ancient sources, and used them as the foundation for a moral allegory. In this view, Atlantis was not meant to be history, but a symbolic city crafted to illustrate the dangers of hubris and the fragility of human achievement. Yet that symbol may have been built upon real disasters remembered across generations. This possibility connects the myth of Atlantis with the broader human experience of loss and renewal. People everywhere have faced floods, earthquakes, and eruptions that erase their homes. Stories of destruction passed down through time may take on new layers, blending fact and imagination until they resemble Plato's tale. Atlantis, then, may not exist in the literal sense, but it may reflect a shared memory of catastrophe deeply rooted in human culture. In the end, modern archaeology and geology invite us to see Atlantis less as a place to be discovered and more as a symbol of the relationship between people and the natural world. The sea that sustains us can also rise against us. The land we build upon can shift and break without warning. Civilizations that seem eternal can vanish in a single generation. Plato's myth captures this truth in vivid form, which is why it continues to resonate even when no ruins are found to confirm it. Atlantis remains lost, and perhaps it was never real in the way some have imagined. Yet the world is filled with its echoes. Cities submerged, coastlines reshaped, and stories of deluge carried across centuries. Whether as allegory or memory, the legend of Atlantis endures because it reminds us that no civilization is invincible, and that beneath our feet and beneath the waves, the earth keeps its own record of time. As we reach the final chapter of our journey, it is time to step back and reflect on what Atlantis truly means. For more than 2,000 years, this tale has endured, passed through the voices of philosophers, explorers, mystics, and dreamers. It is more than a story of a vanished city. It is a mirror that reflects both the greatness and the fragility of human ambition. Part of the enduring power of Atlantis lies in its mystery. From the very beginning, Plato offered only fragments of the tale, leaving space for imagination to fill in the gaps. He spoke of grand palaces, shining metals, vast fleets, and sudden destruction, but he never gave us a complete picture. That incompleteness invites each generation to dream their own version of Atlantis. Some see it as a paradise of wisdom and harmony. Others imagine it as a warning of corruption and downfall. The uncertainty ensures that Atlantis can never be fully claimed by history, and so it remains alive in the imagination. Atlantis is also a moral story. Plato intended it as a lesson against hubris, reminding his audience that no empire, however mighty, is beyond the reach of fate. It is a reminder that human power is fleeting, and that arrogance invites ruin. For the Athenians of his time, it was a cautionary reflection. For us today, it continues to echo, for the rise and fall of civilizations is a rhythm that repeats through history. We see in Atlantis a truth that belongs not only to the past, but also to the present and future. That prosperity must be balanced with humility, and that no society is immune to collapse. Yet there is more to Atlantis than morality. The story also carries within it a note of resilience. Though Atlantis itself falls into the sea, the story of its fall survives across millennia. This survival suggests that even in loss, memory endures. Civilizations may vanish, But the human desire to remember, to tell stories, and to learn from the past remains strong. Atlantis represents both the fragility of our creations and the resilience of our spirit. The myth has also taken root in literature and culture far beyond Plato. During the Renaissance, explorers imagined they might find Atlantis across the ocean, and in the modern age, writers and filmmakers have reimagined the lost world in countless forms. Atlantis has appeared as a utopia, a dystopia, a place of forbidden knowledge, or a cradle of forgotten technology. It has served as a stage for adventure, as well as a symbol of mystery itself. Each retelling reshapes the myth, yet the heart of the story remains. A city once great, now hidden, waiting to be remembered. This persistence shows that Atlantis is not simply a tale about one place, but part of a much older and deeper human dream. Around the world, cultures have imagined lands that slipped beneath the waves, golden ages that ended, or worlds that lie hidden just beyond reach. Atlantis belongs to that collective dream of lost worlds. It is the embodiment of longing, the hope that there was once a place where humanity achieved something extraordinary, and the melancholy that it has been lost. As a story, Atlantis endures because it lives at the boundary of what we know and what we hope. It is both a caution and an inspiration, a warning of human weakness and a reminder of our capacity to imagine greatness. It thrives not because it has been proven, but because it has not. Its mystery ensures its survival. For so long as we seek answers, Atlantis will remain part of our imagination. And so as we close our journey through the myth and memory of Atlantis, let us return to the image that began it all. An island kingdom, shining in its prime, rising proudly above the waves, only to vanish into the depths in a single night. The waves close over it, but the story rises again, carried across centuries by voices that refuse to let it fade. Here, at the quiet end of this exploration, you may let that image linger in your mind. Imagine the stillness of the sea, calm after the storm. Beneath its surface, the ruins of Atlantis rest in silence, timeless and unreachable. Above, the stars shine as they did for Plato, for the Minoans, for explorers and dreamers through the ages. The story remains, a gentle thread connecting past and present. As you drift toward rest, allow the mystery of Atlantis to guide you into the quiet depths of sleep. The city may be lost, but its memory endures. And in that memory lies both a warning and a wonder that human achievement is fragile, yet imagination is eternal. Atlantis, the city that was never found, continues to live on in us, in our stories and in our dreams.